Hi, this is Tag again, and a bunch of you guys asked me to do something about binning. Now, I already tried to make this video a couple times, and none of them came out very well, so this is going to be the last take. Sorry if it's going to be boring. Anyways, basically, there is two major factors on a lot of chips. It's just core quality, especially more modern stuff like K CPUs. For old stuff, you actually have to take into account FSB quite often. So I made a little overview here. Basically, all the platforms that are sort of old enough that I know them well. So let's start with Sockets 370. We're obviously going to get to 775, which is, I think, the specifically requested socket from a bunch of you guys. So I'm going to do that later. Anyways, let's start off with Socket 370. Now, personally, I could only bin those for core quality. It's mainly because the chips have a locked multiplier. But FSB is also sort of important. I found out that some chips do better than others. But like my orange color here basically means that it might be important, but you can't bin for it on ambient. So what I did with both Coppermine and Dualityns is just bin for core quality. Now I have a couple of unlocked chips, but they are TA1 Dualityn chips, so not really the best stuff. Also, the only chips that are going to be unlocked are engineering samples here, basically. Next up is 423. Now 423 is there's only one architecture there, so it's pretty easy. Again, locked, and well, with most of the, I would say from 1800 megahertz, maybe 1700 megahertz upwards, it's only a question of core. But stuff like the 1500 megahertz Pentium 4 is mostly dependent on FSB. So again, it's locked multiplier, so binning FSB on air is going to be hard. Same basically goes for most of the 478 chips, though I never really had like chips that were stuck at too low FSB on cold. So I basically only binned them for core quality again. Now, for these I don't really have anything specific to show you. For the next platforms, I will go into detail a bit more. Now, Prescott 775 is weird, and Prescott 478 is also weird. I haven't yet figured out really, especially 775, how to bin them. I binned a bunch of them for core quality and basically tried to take them cold, and I completely failed. So yeah. Same goes for Pentium Ds, by the way. So those are not on the list here. But I also didn't get anywhere with them, unfortunately, so far. I still have a bunch of chips I have to test. Now, for Cedarmill, I found that it is purely a core quality thing and basically cold scaling. So here we have a bunch of Cedars, and with Cedarmill, what is really important is sort of temperature scaling. So not the cold bug they have, but how much they scale with lower temperature. So my way of doing this is basically those are like 1.33 volts. Those are load voltages. So basically anything that does over 5 gigahertz W prime 32M at those 1.33 or somewhere in those area. Those are different boards, so that might be slight differences here. But anything that does over 5 gigahertz, I take on LN2. Now, Cedar Mills obviously is, well, you basically just want them for the 8 gigahertz achievement, unless you want to uh, run them for hardware points or stuff, but then this also holds true. You basically want a chip that runs full pot, which most of them do, and you want a chip that has a core that scales all the way to full pot basically and runs high frequencies at like high voltages and full pot LN2. So I would argue that taking anything that does over 5 gigahertz, this is W prime 32M, below 1.35 volts is a candidate for cold. So in general, the 8 gigahertz achievement on Cedar is, I would say, significantly harder than on FX. On FX, I think if you get the right model of CPU, you can get away with binning maybe even as little as 1 or 2 chips. But with these, you're probably going to have to bin somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 at least, and then still get lucky to find one that is going to validate 8 gigahertz. Um, let's get back to our binning. Now, Conroe L. Conroe L is the Celeron 400s. So something like a 420, 430, 440, these chips. They are another one of those unfortunate cases where you have a locked multiplier. So with these, I can definitely tell you that FSB is important, but you can't bin for it on air. Also, FSB scaling with cold is important. Good example, let's pull this up again. There we are. My Celeron 420s, as you can see, have not really all that good FSB scaling compared to many other chips. 445 FSB air, 2 480 single stage, and barely under 500 on LN2. That is pretty crap. So and with the higher chips, you basically just have to bin a bunch of them for core quality, and then hope that one of the okay or good ones does enough FSB for the score you want. As you can see here, this is core quality, so FSB, this is at maximum multiplier, whatever this is. I think yeah, it's X9 or something. At 1.5 volts BIOS. All W prime 32M obviously. So this chip here did 443, but did like 4,350 megahertz on Cascade because it was BCLK limited. This has a slightly worse core here, this 430, but as you can see, it runs benches at 4,950 and does 550 valid on Cascade as well. So this chip is good for FSB as well. Now, same with the 440s, and you can see you basically just want a good core and then hope that it doesn't FSB wall too low at cold temperatures. Basically, same with all of those. Yeah, that's Conroe L basically. Now Ellendale is your Pentium E 2000 and Core 2 Duo E4000 series. Now let's open up a Pentium here. There we are. Now with these, I marked both green because there is chips where it's basically only core dependent, and there's chips where it's only FSB dependent. So both are important. For example, the 2140 is a purely FSB dependent chip. You want the highest FSB here. So far, I haven't done enough testing of any of the good ones to see which ones have enough cold FSB scaling to take current records, because I think I lost them again either to Lumi or to Tapaka scores once they got reinstated on HWBot. So the the 2160 is already the first chip where it's dependent on both, but more to a point where you want to favor FSB over core quality. So, uh, for example, I think this was my best chip, the 490. Now, with Allendale, you are going to have negative FSB scaling, or not negative. It's not going to get worse than on ambient, but you basically have your FSB scale to a certain temperature, and if you're running below that temperature again, then your FSB gets worse again. So even with the high multi-chips in certain situations, it is something like this, for example. It is definitely recommended to have a chip with good FSB qualities because you can just run it colder, usually. Uh, this was garbage, for example. But yeah, also cold scaling varies a bit. So it's not always linear, but it's not nearly as bad as Cedarmill. From the 2200 and 2220, I would favor core quality over FSB. But I have already noticed that with these 2220s, that you also need a good FSB chip with a good core to run low enough temperatures to get far over 5 gigahertz. It's pretty hard to get Allendale over like 5.1, 5.15 gigahertz. It's certainly possible, but again, it's pretty hard. So you need a chip that runs like minus 140 probably, or has a really stupid good core. Uh, for example, here we have the E4700 here is a bit of a exception because it is technically Allendale, but more Conroe based. I think it actually has Conroe dies, so with disabled L3 cache, half of it. So L2 cache, I mean. Anyways, this here has really good cores, and for example, the good chip here has a cold bug or a ideal temperature, I should say around minus 100. For the 4500, for example, my good chip only does high clocks because I can run minus 120 because it is really good with FSB on air. Now this chip is, yeah, this is pretty much unicorn FSB territory. Uh, I have heard of chips that do it supposedly, but I've never seen a score getting anywhere close to this 520 here. And the chip does well over 600 megahertz cold as well. So, but the core is pretty mad. That's the 3.5 gigahertz at 1.5 volts. That's actually pretty garbage. As you can see, I have 4500 here with like 3.75 gigahertz. But I'm not going to get anywhere with those because they lack it in FSB. As you can see, even this one is worse, even though it has significantly better core. And well, also one thing I sort of noticed, but I'm not sure if it is coincidence or not, is that L batches usually scale worse with cold than Q batches. Again, there is exceptions, but I feel like on average that might be true. Anyways, let's close up Allendale and move on to Conroe. Conroe again, I have both marked because there is both chips that are purely FSB and chips that are purely core quality. So let's open E60, E6000 series here. For example, first chip we have here is the E6300. This is a purely FSB limited chip. So you want the highest FSB possible. Actually, I shouldn't say purely FSB. Actually, maybe. Hard to say. There might be some SL90A steppings, there are some of those that really suck core-wise. So maybe if you have a golden one of those, you're not going to get uh, close to the B2 stepping. This is M0. But M0 can also be decent. 6320, same as 6300, just double the cache. And different stepping, those are G0, but it doesn't really matter at all. If E6400 is the first one where you have to sort of consider core quality. I don't have it in this spreadsheet because, well, I didn't properly realize it when I binned those. But basically here is SLA 97, those are M0 chips. And M0 chips generally have worse core. However, currently my best scores are with an M0 chip, so again, exceptions for everything. Also, I have a really good one for FSB, but the core on this one sucks. So that's kind of unfortunate. 6420 sort of depends on core quality, but less than 6400 because G0 stepping CPUs usually have better cores in general. So this is mostly FSB. 6550 is actually, I think, same multi as the 6300. So purely FSB chip. 6400 is mostly core quality with a FSB component. I would say something around 540 would be um, the minimum to get somewhere good. Now, or 530 maybe. As you can see, this chip is 515 with a really good core. That's over 4 gigahertz at 1.5 volts. But the FSB scaling to LN2 is really bad, so it only does like 580. And this is actually my best chip I have, 550 Air, sort of okay core. As you can see, 5.5 gigahertz, 1M on LN2. Not terrible, not quite where Lumi's chip is, but I would say pretty decent for around 100 of them binned. This one here is a bit weird. I was hoping for more from this, but can't do much about it. Anyways, mostly core, and it should probably do around 530 FSB for good scores. And like 4 gigahertz would be a really good chip. 4 gigahertz, 1.5 volts WRAM. 6700 is mostly, if not only, core quality. But again, I had this one. This absolutely sucked for FSB. So yeah, 500. It should probably do 500 to consider it running cold. But most of them do. I just get super unlucky sometimes, and I get chips of like known that the whole L629 range is a sort of known golden badge. There are some badge ranges which are definitely more golden than this, but this is generally a good one. Uh, Anyways, you basically probably want over 500 FSB. 6750 is, well, uh, again, a bit of a combo chip, but it's mostly FSB. Now, mostly FSB as in to get decent scores, mostly FSB. To get gold on this chip, basically impossible these days. Lumi is such a good chip and a absolutely crazy P5E3 to go with it. I don't think at least in like the benches here and it shouldn't be possible to find a better chip, almost certainly, unless you're going to bin hundreds of them. Then maybe, but even then, just maybe, you would still need a good board. 6850 is again a bit of a dual chip with a Actually, stronger focus on FSB again because G0 is generally better core-wise. Stronger focus than the E6600 because it has the same multiplier. So you basically want something around 550 plus. I think my current top score is actually with this chip here with the slightly worse core. So FSB is what you want here, but you also need a at least decent core. Okay, I think that's Conroe. Now Wolfstead 3M is a bit of an odd one. When you're looking at HW bot scores for it, you probably might be inclined to think that it is a FSB binning chip, but that's not really the case. This is actually not the one I wanted. I wanted the Pentiums. Now with these, you mostly want to bin them for core quality actually, because FSB comes from lowering VPLL mostly on these. So once you go cold on them, you will see significant increases in FSB by lowering the VPLL. So even chips that aren't good necessarily for BCLK or FSB rather, will be competitive if they have a good core. So again, as you can see, once I learned this, I switched to binning core quality. Same goes for the other chips basically. It's for the higher ones you just want to bin for core quality, obviously. E5800, 5700, 5500, probably both, but mostly core. Again, because of the whole VPLL situation. With the quad to duos, you actually want to sort of bin for FSB on air, especially 7200 and 7300. Now 7400, you need both to be good. But something like 540 is probably enough for the FSB. You will get there with VPLL, but when you lower VPLL on certain chips, you are going to lose temperature, so you're going to have to run it warm up basically. You also want a good core. 7500 is mostly core, and basically, as you can see, I just tested them for 400 to make sure FSB doesn't totally suck. I tested FSB on them somewhat because of situations like this, BCLK limited on LN2. So yeah. Also 7500, I'm really unlucky. I binned like 170 chips and I'm still nowhere near the top scores on the chip. I can't find a good one of those. 7600 basically same, but even more relevant, the core quality. Actually, core quality on these is probably worse than on the 7200 because on the 7200 you can find chips with a Wolftail 6M core. They are pretty rare, but they exist. So those are basically the ones with the more capacitors on the back. Those would be the ones you want for these. Now Wolftail 6M I put in blue here because, well, I wasted more time on trying to figure out Wolftail 6M than any other like architecture on 775, and I got absolutely nowhere. So every time I think I understand it, it just throws a wrench in it and nothing works. Anyways, you might want to bin these for capability of SuperPi 32M on X48, or you might want to bin them purely for core quality and hope you can figure out the rest. I'm not sure. So no real concrete recommendations on Wolftail 6M from me. Let's go on. 1156. 1156 45 nanometer. Now, this is basically a category where you want to bin your chips for core quality, and then the behavior of these is basically that once you get cold, on a lot of them, you're going to lose maximum runnable voltage the colder you go. So again, only on a lot of them. So ideally you want a chip that can run as cold as possible with as much voltage as possible. There might be ones that basically don't have the problem because they exist on 1366 and that's basically the same architecture. Uh, Personally, for me, most of them, you have to run them at such low voltage, below minus 70-ish degrees, that you're going to lose clocks. Also, some of them just don't scale with cold or voltage at all beyond a certain point. Uh, so I had a chip that gained, I think, 30 megahertz from ambient to LN2. So because why not? The FSB here is in light green because it is sort of important that you don't get a chip that completely sucks and doesn't even do like to, let's say, 210. There is chips that don't do 200. So yeah, that's basically the 45 nanometer experience. It's really annoying because again, cold behavior spinning is always a pain. 1156 45 nanometer is 45 32 nanometer is significantly easier. It's basically just bin for core quality and then make sure that the FSB doesn't completely suck. But so far I haven't found one where it did completely suck. So most of them do FSB fine, to enough to be maxed out. With these also AMC is somewhat important. Not really in the fashion you might think it is, because you basically want to bin the IMC for supporting or running well with hypers. But there's also some IMCs out there on the 32 nanometers that completely suck. So it's basically just relevant for SuperPi 32M and maybe Geekbench if it gets competitive enough in the future. So you sort of want to bin for IMCs. Okay, here we have the Google Doc I made for this, or rather that shared Google Doc. I'm just going to use the 650, which is only my stuff. So basically you want, as you can see, around 4.7 gigahertz ish at 1.4 volts to have at least a decent chip. These chips are pretty good on air and they're also pretty good on LN2. Like you can't expect 6.5 ish if you have a golden one that does near full pot. You also need to do a mod. I might show that in a future video on the H55M UD2H to get closer to full pot, and they also scale with VPLL, which is also something I want to figure out on that board because my best i5 650 runs damn close to full pot, as in you can run it full pot during benches just fine, but if you let it sit for too long on the desktop, so basically the cold soaks through it, it will cold bug. And it scales with VPLL, and I'm at the minimum setting of the board, so I might do a modding video on this board to get around this problem. Anyways, basically just core quality on these. Let's move on to 1366 45 nanometer, more or less the same as the 1156 45 nanometer, but with some chips that care about purely BCLK if you're into Xeons, which is why I'm going to pull up the Xeons now. Now, actually, let's talk about i7s before. i7s are mainly core quality, and once you find one with a really good core, like something below 1.3 volts for 4.5 gigahertz Super Pi 32M would be sort of considered good. The only thing it's going to hold you back is basically if it sucks completely for FSB. For 920 that is. For the higher bin chips, basically just core quality. Now for the 920, you're still probably better off with a chip with a golden core that sucks BCLK wise, because, well, a lot of the chips have the same strange code behavior as the 1156 chips, and the completely crazy chips for some reason don't have it at all. I know of some 45 nanometer 1366 chips that run full pot and don't care about voltages at full pot pretty much. So yeah. Again, now let's do the Xeons. Basically anything E55 with a 0 here in this place is purely FSB, and L chips are also mostly FSB. Once you get to E chips, the rule of thumb is E chips are core over FSB, or BCLK rather, but BCLK also matters. X chips are purely core with one quirk. As you can see, they seem to suck for BCLK, but they don't. What this means is that the uncore on these chips is not good enough to post at the 200 FSB, because it is always fixed to run at the value set stock. So you can't change uncore multiplier on these Xeons. You can't change it down. You can change it up with some bugs on some badges. But you can't change it down. At least I haven't figured out how to do so far. So just keep that in mind. You're basically binning chips for Encore when binning for BCLK. But it's mostly core. As you can see, 1.3 volts, 1.3 volts. This is vCore 4.5 GHz Super Pi 32M. They also have decent Encore, all of them. So that's basically that. 32 nanometer is, well, again, if you're talking purely i7s, it's all Extreme Editions and the 970, which has high enough multiplier. Actually, there's a 980 non Extreme Edition as well, but they have high enough multiplier that is basically only core quality and to a certain extent IMC and Encore. But I don't really bin chips for Encore because you're going to run into problems with behavior and Encore scaling on cold that you can't predict anyways. So a chip with meh Encore on ambient might be better than a chip with golden Encore once you take it cold. The green on BCLK is because of Xeons again. Basically everything here with the 0 again is purely BCLK. Same as the 5620, 5630, and well, the L5640 as well, because it's a 6 core with lower clocks. E5640 is sort of also a core limited chip, but still mostly BCLK. Same for 5645, 5649. And once you get to the X chips, it's mostly core over BCLK. Now 5650 is still BCLK dependent. My best scoring chip is running in BCLK limited and cold still. So you can see this is a really good core. This is R15 at 1.3 volts, which is my go-to benchmark for these. All these are core only, so 56, 60, 70, 75, and so on. Actually, let's go back to the 45 nanometer stuff quickly, because I wanted to talk about something specifically for Xeons. On some of these Xeons, you have to run them at a even multiplier, which 45 nanometer 1366 doesn't like at all. So you basically have to bin the chips that are decent for running even multiplier well as well on top of other stuff, which is why this one has obviously had bad cores. Multicore sucks basically means it didn't run the x18 multiplier properly, but this one did. So yeah, I think that's enough for this. 1155. Now 1155 locked is, I don't like it. Basically what you're going to do is bin the chips for BCLK, get close to 108 on air, and then bin the IMCs. It's just painful. No fun. Same for Sandy. You basically want to bin the chip for the maximum multiplier that you can apply with it still working, and that's it. And Ivy Bridge unlocked is actually sort of fun-ish. I mean, it's still a KCPU, but you want to bin that one for core purely, and to a certain extent IMC if you want to run memory and stuff. But yeah, that's about it for Intel. Let's move on to AMD. Now this list is significantly shorter because I have less experience and because there's less platforms. Socket A, the old Thunderbirds, the ceramic package chips, I have no idea. So skip over those. Polamino is purely core because you can unlock them. And they do enough FSB for anything you want. T-Bread, same, only core. Actually, let's pull up a spreadsheet with these. And Barton is also the same. With Socket A, binning is really easy. You just want to bin them for core and then go cold. Cold scaling is relatively linear on these, so far from what I've found out. So it is a really easy platform. Basically, if your chip is good on air, it's going to be good on cold. You might have negative clock scaling below a certain temperature. Even though the chip will run full pot, you might not get your best scores on full pot. Actually, the chip will almost certainly always run full pot, but you might not get your best scores. From what I found out so far, you're probably going to get your best scores somewhere between -100 and -140 on chips that don't scale all the way to full pot, obviously. Now, it's basically the same all over the place. Some chips are locked, but even locked chips are sort of unlocked, as in you can run them on a VIA or SIS chipset board, and they will unlock via the mobile multiplier bridges. I might do a video on that as well someday. XPMs are even easier. Basically, you want that magical IQ YHA stepping here. But for all the binning data I'm showing in this video, I'm just going to zip it up in a file and attach it in the video description down below. It might be a bit messy because I didn't like redo all of my spreadsheets in the style of this socket A one. Some of them are a bit more messy. This one I read it specifically so other people could learn from it and like figure out batches. So it has selectable filters up here and fancy stuff like that. It also has more data than the other ones. For especially 775, I don't even write down the batches of the batch chips. So because I'm never going to buy a 775 chip individually for the batch. Yeah, that's socket A. Now 754, 939, 940, AM2, AM2 Plus are all the same basically. Those are all chips where you basically only want to bin for cold behavior of sorts. So what I mean by this is that the FSB on these chips scales negatively with temperature. So the colder you run, the less FSB your chip will do. So that means that even a chip with a mediocre core will be capable of doing decent clocks if it has like if it still does enough FSB once it's cold. So what I like to do is basically throw the chips on single stage and see if I'm FSB limited or core limited, and if I'm still core limited, and basically if I still have FSB headroom on single stage and I can push the core to a somewhat good frequency, I'm keeping the chip for further testing. And if I'm hard FSB limited on single stage, close to a good score, I'm also probably going to keep it. And basically, if it doesn't even post on single stage, it's probably no good. Exceptions are certain 939 chips. This is a list from Tabaka. This is the only one of those I'm going to share here, but it's basically showing cold bugs. Now, obviously, FX chips have way lower cold bugs. These are basically, I think, the ideal temperatures that they were run at, because on FX chips you can raise the multi, so you can run low FSB and just get good scores because you can run really low temperatures and get good scores at low FSB. Now, basically the major exception to the rule of if it doesn't work on single stage, it's more or less worthless is the Athlon 64 4000 plus, because pretty much all of them, at least the ones that are here on the list and the few that I personally tested as well, have absolutely terrible cold bugs once you get enough FSB that basically you have high enough core clocks, because again, lock chips. So with these, you can probably bin them really well at cold ambient or even normal ambient. Because ideal temperatures is going to be somewhere around 0 degrees. But most other chips in these categories run best around single stage temperatures. You can also probably find some that have really golden cores and suck for cold, relative at least, that would run best at like chilled water temperatures of like minus 20-ish. So really good platform, I would say, to get decent scores without LN2, but you're probably going to need LN2 to get to the real top scores because you want fine temperature management. Okay, let's move on to exactly, that's why I specified AM2 plus non-DNAP. Basically the original phenoms. There are some phenom 2s that are AM2 plus as well. Those are basically the same as AM3 CPUs. It's basically just the Phenom 2940 Black Edition. So with AM3, it's basically again only core on the Black Edition chips and IMC to a degree, because some IMC gets significantly worse with lower temperatures. But that's about it. Obviously, AM3 also includes the 6 cores, but those are more or less the same, behavior-wise at least. And there are some specific chips like the 2 cores and some 4 cores that you can unlock to 5 cores, where you want to basically bin them, bin the cores individually to find the ones that perform the best for your unlocked 3 core or unlocked 5 core. Actually, I think I have something. Let's pull that up quickly. Okay, here we are. Those are the Phenom 2 X2555 Blacks. Now, I personally always found that disabling core 4 was the best choice to run in core 1, 2, and 3. But it is probably worth binning them in different like combinations to find the 3 best cores, and obviously binning them for core quality as well. Personally, my dual cores all suck, unfortunately. So yeah, but that's basically what I mean by that. I think with that we are actually, yeah, aim 3 locked. I have no idea. I have never been to any of them. Maybe if yours watched to this point, he can leave a comment down below where all the AM3 locked pinning knowledge is, so I can pin that and maybe that helps. AM4 and upwards, I have no clue. Never really touched it. Anyways, that's about it for my pinning experience. I hope this wasn't too long. This video is going to probably be about 40 minutes long and pretty boring, but again, many people ask for it, so I did it. And well, I'm not going to redo it, so that's it. Bye.